in a society that has a knee-jerk reaction, I'm interested in what you would say if you had your crystal ball, what you think the fallout will be as a result of Flint, Michigan's water crisis.
Well, I would take another example of environmental mishandling, which is the EPA releasing, was it 2 or 3 million tons of mine wastewater in that river in Colorado. And the problem is that when you're saving the planet, you're not doing the things that really matter. You're not looking after the local. Pollution, most pollution is local, and you need to focus on the local pollution. It's when they get into saving the planet that you lose touch with all that.
Thank you for coming out today. If I understood you correctly, you said that there were one or more voices in Europe that are starting to see the light and to speak out in terms of this topic. Other than yourself, is there anyone on the horizon in Europe who has a chance of being heard on the world stage and inject what some of us would call some sanity into this discussion?
I think the sanity has come from reality. You know, reality is the great educator. And the reality is that Europe's renewable energy program has proved disastrous. It's created, you've got very high electricity prices. Germany and Denmark have two of the highest electricity prices in the world. It shuts down, it destroys the economics of gas and coal-fired power stations. And so they've got this immense practical problem, and they don't know what to do about it. But the first reaction of the European Commission was say, well, look, hold on, guys. We don't want to keep going on down this route. So, if you like, I'd love to claim credit for making the European Commission see sense, but actually that isn't the case. What has happened is just reality. The reality is so horrible you can't ignore it anymore, and that will happen here. But you don't want to go there. You don't want to get to the gruesome reality where you have to say, we actually have to back off out of this. You want to look what's happening in Europe and learn from it. And that's the one thing the Obama administration and the EPA do not have a clue about.
How can we get your message to the right people in America?
Well, first of all, I think one of the key thing is not to be intimidated by the campaign of delegitimization to speak out. That is first and foremost, because part of what the other side, if you like, are doing is trying to silence criticism. So the first thing is to get people talking about it. The second thing is that, as I mentioned right at the outset, the United States is the only country where there has been a political debate about global warming, and Republicans disagree. A lot of Republicans disagree with Democrats and the global warming consensus. So there's a clear, you have much more of a democratic choice than anywhere in the world, because in Europe, virtually every political party has signed up to this. Every party with a hope of governing. So you have no choice. Here, you have a choice. And that's why I said November 8th is decision time.
I have two questions. I'm right here. First of all, is there a way to hold Gina McCarthy up to sufficient ridicule so that she has to resign whether Obama has her back or not? And the second question is there anybody out there calling windmills what they are, which is an uglification of our landscape and a killer of 600,000 or however many 600,000 birds per year?
The problem with the EPA is that it's a completely unaccountable federal agency, and it really, the only person Gina McCarthy is accountable to is the president, and that's why I come back to the answer I just gave. It really depends on the outcome of the next election. I completely agree with you on if you look at the way the EPA, I've got an article on today's National Review Online about this, but the EPA is a lawless agency. It doesn't just go to the limits of the law, it goes way beyond the law, and you've seen this. It's been involved in covert lobbying, which the General Accounting Office said was violated federal law. So, as I say, this is an agency that's out of control, but it's not answerable to anyone other than the president. So, what was the second question, sir? I think with what you see with what I call the avian holocaust is that a lot of the environmental NGOs a lot of their funding comes from very large West Coast foundations that are very, very green, and they are very closely aligned with the renewable industry, and that is a big problem. On the other hand, there are smaller nature conservation societies which have the interests of the birds first and foremost. But I think this is a crisis of environmentalism. Is environmentalism about protecting nature, or is it about a huge political agenda? And I think because the environmentalist NGOs have gone on the ideological agenda, it is leading to all these problems, and at some point they will be called out on it.
Yes, right in the back. If about 8 to 10 years ago, the term global warming was somewhat supplanted by the term climate change. And then a second part to the question, as far as, that first part is just fine.
I prefer to talk about global warming because that's the title of my book. This is a difficult one because if you look at the nomenclature, there was talk about climate change. Climate change, we can date it we know that they were talking about climate change in 1988 because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's when it was established. I think partly why they talked about climate change because as some of you have been saying to me, recall in the early 70s, the concern then was cooling. So in a way, you can talk about climate change kind of wraps up all the threats to the temperatures might go lower, they might go higher, call it climate change. So I think that's the reason why the IPCC adopted that nomenclature. And if you look at when the IPCC was formed, its formation, which happened, the build-up, there was through the late 80s and the mid-80s, the people then would have been aware of that actually they've been, 10 years before, they've been talking about the threat of global cooling. So you choose a name that covers both outcomes, don't you?
About 8 years ago, we went to the Heartland Institute conference on global warming. There were 88 PhDs, along with the president of the Czech Republic, who wrote the book Blue Planet in Green Shackles, and he explains the political nature of it. But Dr. Linzen from MIT, Dr. Soon from, he's with Smithsonian Institute of Climatology, Dr. Art Robinson. I went with an open mind. There were 88 PhDs and the president of the Czech Republic, and they all said that there's no scientific evidence that what we're doing is affecting the CO2 or causing global warming. They spent over $100,000 to try to get any news agency to come there, and the only news agency that would come are these obscure little ones in Europe. But I mean, and Dr. Robinson and Dr. Soon, they submitted their research and had 26,000 scientists say that global warming doesn't exist, but nobody ever hears about any of these things. And I just wanted you to comment on that.
Yeah, I think this is what I referred to earlier, is the delegitimization of criticism and alternative views. And it's a huge, they've got to take competing explanations off the table. And that's why it's terribly important, as I said earlier, is to keep talking about it. And even though that conference wasn't reported, it will have some impact. Things ripple out. And I can't say more clearly. It's critical to keep talking about it and present alternative points of view.
Yes, sir. A few moments ago, a gentleman asked about uglification of the wind turbine landscape. And I might point out that there are people who object to the uglification. The Kennedys at Hyannisport were adamantly opposed to any wind tunnel that could be seen from their front yard.
Yeah, environmentalism is very interesting because when I at the start of my talk I said, this is an ideology, you compare it to Marxism. I think the thing about environmentalism, as I call it, it's ethics for the wealthy. If you show the world, I care about saving the planet, yakety yak, you gain immunity from criticism from the left about having too much money. And I think that accounts for a lot of why a lot of wealthy people are so ostensible about being green. It's, as I say, ethics for the wealthy.
That's terrific. What's your position on nuclear power? There's a source that couldn't be cleaner, and I personally think it's been terribly mismanaged by the federal government as well as industry.
Nuclear power is, once you've got a nuclear power once you've built a nuclear power station, the economics are very, very clear. You want to keep that nuclear power station running for as long as you possibly can, because the costs are upfront in terms of building it, and then the costs at the end when you decommission it. That's where the costs are, and the running costs in the middle are really quite low. And that's what's very interesting, what's happened in Germany. Why Germany, which has been the leader in the greening of Europe, you look what's happening in Germany. After Fukushima, Angela Merkel panicked, and she's ordered the rapid close down of the German nuclear industry. If Merkel and the Germans are really concerned about CO2 emissions, you wouldn't do that. You would keep those nuclear power stations going on for as long as possible. So what Germany shows is this isn't really about global warming. They say it's about global warming, but if it was really about global warming, you wouldn't shut down a single nuclear power station.
Which of the Republican candidates do you think are strongest on this, and what should we be listening for as these primaries proceed?
Well, I have to say, as a foreigner, I wouldn't want to suggest which way you vote. It's sort of kind of, but I am going to. There are some things you can hear with some politicians, you just know they're going to be really bad on this. So when Jeb Bush says, I want to create consensus in Washington, and there are so many people on the planet we're bound to be having an effect on climate, kind of alarm bells ring a little bit, so anyway.
I came from Iceland, and they have about the cleanest environment in the world in Iceland. The electricity is produced by geothermal and hydroelectric. The houses are heated geothermally. Yet, we had a little volcano in Iceland last year, 7 months, and we were the biggest polluter 6 of the 7 months in the world. Country of 330,000 people. I want your comments about that.
Well, I think the country that actually takes, I think Germany scores very highly as a climate hypocrite for closing down its nuclear power stations. But the other one that's strongly in the running, I wouldn't put Iceland in. I've been to Iceland once. I really love the country. But I think the other one that sticks out is Norway. They're going zero. They're boasting they're going zero carbon. And where's their wealth come from? It comes from under the North Sea from oil. I mean, you just can't make that stuff up, can you?